All right. Welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I'm Cassandra, your organic beauty, health, and endocannabinoid mentor. And today we have Miss Laura Lagano on the podcast. Now, I first found out about Miss Laura by, as you know, I am a functional medicine junkie, and I was Googling functional medicine, women, and cannabis. And Laura was one of the first to come up on that vast search engine we have access to. And, you know, between her cannabis education program, the plethora of conferences that she speaks at, I am very honored to have Laura on the podcast today as we dig into women-specific detailed CBD and cannabis and how it can really influence our lives and other components that can also help cannabis and CBD work better for us. So before we jump in, I'd like to share with you a little bit about Laura with her incredible background. So Laura Lagano is an integrative clinical nutritionist, the author of The CBD Oil Miracle, and co-founder and director of Holistic Canna, an online learning platform about integrating cannabis with other holistic approaches. Laura's journey to cannabis was led by her dissatisfaction with what conventional healthcare had to offer her daughter, Isabella, who had a developmental disability. Isabella is now in the workforce preparing to be a barista and on her way to independent living, thanks to integrative healing approaches, including nutrition and hemp-derived CBD oil. Currently, Laura offers cannabis education for both professionals and patients, produces CBD-infused events, consults with cannabis-related companies, and serves on the advisory board of several medical marijuana organizations. So as you can see, she has got a great background. So Laura, are you with us?
I'm here, Cassandra. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, you're welcome, girl. We were just talking about the long winter and the long abrasive early spring. I see you've got a scarf on over there. I'm in Minnesota and I don't have a scarf on. So it tells me something that hopefully we're going to get a break into warm weather here soon. But thanks so much for being on the podcast. You know, there's a lot of things that we can discuss today, but, you know, just so our listeners can get to know a little bit more about you on an intimate and personal level. You know, it says in your bio that you came to cannabis and CBD through Isabella, and I've saw sweet, sweet pictures of her, and my gosh, she has grown up since your journey has started. So maybe you could just tap in a little bit about, you know, what awakened you to this world, crazy world right now of CBD and cannabis and hemp-derived medicine.
Sure. Well, you know, it probably started with my original journey, which was looking at nutrition when I was quite young, in my mother's kitchen in Brooklyn. And my mother was, I would say, did not have the best relationship with food. Meaning that, you know, she was Italian and Italians love food, but she also was an American at the same time. And so there was sort of this push and pull about what food meant to her. And I felt that there was an influence of food on behavior. And that is really how I got into studying nutrition. And then fast forward many, many years after I then did go to school to study nutrition for both my undergraduate and graduate degrees. And I really studied in graduate school nutrition education. And then I had a child who was having a myriad of developmental issues. Isabella also had a seizure disorder. She had behavioral issues, poor eye contact. Ultimately, all those characteristics would equal a diagnosis of autism. But she was very relatable because that's what I really focused on, was her ability to connect with people. And I had been, at the time, this is several years ago, of course, there was a lot going on across the country about medical marijuana. Now, California had already approved medical marijuana in 1996, but nobody else was doing anything. And then Colorado approved many, many years later. And I was sort of watching what was going on because, of course, you know, unless you went to, I don't know what college, there was always cannabis on every college campus. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think anybody was ever thinking of it as a healing herb. At
Mm-hmm.
least nobody was framing themselves that way. But I think if I started thinking back, and I was thinking back to people I knew who were using cannabis on a very daily basis, and I realized, you know what? All of those people had some sort of level of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And Isabella has a fairly high level of anxiety that she hides, I'm going to say, very well. She has a lot of splinter skills, is what we call them, which a lot of people have splinter skills for all sorts of things. They figure out how are they going to live in the world as it exists. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a person who has anxiety, you might say, okay, I'm not going to go to that party at that time because it's going to be too crowded then. I may go at a different time. So we learn how to, and that's in the most simplistic way. We learn how
Right.
to manage. And I thought, you know what? I started doing some research, and cannabis is considered to be a very, very potent anti-anxiety compound. And it's primarily right now what they're looking at is the CBD, or the cannabidiol is known to be that compound. So that's really how I got into it, with her, is looking at other things that can change. Of course, I had already known about seizures, uh, because of the story with
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte Figge, and the cannabis product that was made specifically for her, Charlotte's Web. But there were other things. It was the anxiety. Also, something really exciting, if you want me to branch out into that, was actually healing those tight junctions that we see in leaky gut. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, yeah. And at that time, as far as probably research with epileptic seizures, it was probably the vast research that was available to you at that time. And, I think whether it's autistic children, I've done a lot of nano CBD oil with a lot of the epileptic seizure children of ours. And for a parent to be able to take their child down from 26 to 12 seizures a day down to 2 or 3 is it's a life transforming experience for them, and their child, and the pressure and the stress on the mom. So, for you, I'm sure you've been able to reach a lot of mothers. And have you been able to help? I guess I'll ask you the question. Have you been able to then help other mothers along that same road, kind of help their children?
Absolutely. I mean, that it's funny that you should ask that question, because when Isabella was little, I was working, mostly at that time and beforehand, mostly in food writing and public relations and marketing. So I wasn't working as a clinician, but she brought me back on that journey to my original interest in nutrition, was that impact
Mm-hmm.
on mood and behavior. And of course, we can include, for behavior, anybody who's being affected by seizures. Typically, when you're talking about being on the autism spectrum, there's usually some sort of behavioral component. Now, I'm not going to, categorize that as neurological, because, it's a whole body disorder. But I was helping a lot of families at that, this is many, many years ago, because I was using nutrition, orthomolecular doses of things like fish oils, other fatty acids, acetylcarnitine, enzymes. I mean, there's a multitude of things. And my husband said to me, Laura, aren't you a licensed practitioner? Isn't your, I said, well, as a matter of fact, I am. And maybe I should be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of funny, because I came at it from the vantage point of being a mom and really wanting to help other families. And then later on, I did set up a practice. And that's when I went back to study functional medicine at the Institute of Functional Medicine, and did the whole training program. So, I'm one of the few dietitians who's gone through the entire program with IFM. And it was so life-changing to me, and everything, Cassandra, made so much sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I think when you get in, I really view you as a pioneer, in that essence, because you were dabbling at the time, and then you knew fundamentally, these other, in functional medicine, we call it systems biology. We have gut, we have a brain, we have amino acids missing in the brain, sometimes genetic, sometimes environmental. And so for you to then layer that on top of what you are already doing, exploratory, just trying things out with Isabella, is probably, my assumption is really what sparked it for you, because you found out what was working, and I feel, especially in the cannabis industry, this has really been an industry of pioneers and those that are passionate about the power of the plant, and finding the ways and the resources, and then helping others do the same thing. So I really see that you've done that. So you've now dealt with families. Can you maybe share a little bit about how you kind of formed this really, really strong collective, which now you have, the Holistic Canna Education Forum, where the vast knowledge that you have behind you with all of your partners are really, really incredible. From there, fast forward, how did you come to, bringing all of this together? And can you tell me a little bit about the struggles of bringing this about? And because you were really one of the first to bring an education center to the internet.
Well, my business partner and I, who was my business partner at the time, Donna Shields, and I saw that there was really nothing to be educated about. There was nothing, so I was learning on my own. And this is what I've done all along. Isabella has taken me on this journey, so that when I started investigating what I could do for her to help, ameliorate, because she had very long seizures. The seizures she had, Cassandra, were almost an hour long. Grand mal seizures. It's very frightening to see a grand mal seizure, but it's especially frightening to see one that doesn't look like it's ending, and it's your baby, a small child. So I just hit the ground running to find things that I could do with her. Because, of course, in the medical world, what they wanted to do was just give her medications. By the time she was 4, she was on 3 different medications, and it wasn't happening. Things were not working for her. So I really had to investigate all those things on my own. However, in the area of seizures and nutrition, I already had a degree, and I already had 2 degrees in nutrition and working on my doctorate. So I could find those resources easily. When it came to finding the information about cannabis, just even learning about the endocannabinoid system, of course, that was a major aha moment. And realizing that all of this interaction, this superhighway between the brain and the gut, is really modulated by the endocannabinoid system. I mean, talk about an aha moment. And then I realized that for myself, I had recurrent miscarriage, which is an autoimmune disease. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is we're seeing an association between autoimmune disease of parents and possibly having children who are on the spectrum and with developmental delays, because a lot of what goes on in autism has to do with autoimmune disease, and and it's a whole body disorder. So that then started me thinking, wait a minute, I really need to look a lot closer about the endocannabinoid system, and how does this overlay with autoimmune disease? How does this overlay with women's health? And everything just started making sense to me. And I realized, you know what? I really have to help other people, learn about this and figure out, how to teach them. And I have to say, at the beginning, people were not, even now, people are not necessarily getting that they need to learn about this. And my feeling, Cassandra, is I'm a dietitian. Mm-hmm. I'm a nutritionist. It's a plant. Somebody said to me, and this is going to totally make you laugh. Somebody said to me very, very sincerely, why would I, as a dietitian, want to study cannabis? And I said, well, it's a plant.
Right.
To me, it makes total sense. But what we have is a lot of canophobia.
Yep.
So, you're very, you and I are both unusual in that we're willing to, I have my name on the front of a book, You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have a podcast. I mean, we're out there. We're very
Mm-hmm.
visible. And in the beginning, I was definitely very concerned. And there were definitely people that were not going to open the door for me, you know, the proverbial door. And many of those people who were not going to take me on to do, you know, affiliate with
Mm-hmm.
the summit that I had or podcasts or anything, now they're all calling me. And some of them,
Exactly.
but it takes people a little while. And I think it's the same um, for practitioners. But what I see that's going to happen, and I wonder if you see this yourself, is that we see everything that we see the change, the paradigm shift usually comes from a swell from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
It typically doesn't, it's not trickle down from the top. So let's say if we look at things, you know, a topic that's near and dear to your heart, even beauty and fashion.
Right.
Beauty and fashion is typically, I know we like to think it's coming from, you know, the you know, couture in Paris, but it's
Right.
really Paris and couture is usually reflecting what's going on in the street.
Yep.
So, you know, if we look at music, that starts in the street. That starts very, very grassroots. And we definitely are seeing that in cannabis because, of course, there are people who have been using cannabis. Cannabis has been around longer than tea. And most people who use cannabis are using it medically, even though they don't call it medical. They're using it for mood disorders or anxiety, depression, insomnia, and pain. And those are exactly the top 3 reasons why cannabis is recommended medically. So once you start putting all of that together, you realize, wait a minute, maybe that's a good way to affect change from, you know, from the ground up. So I think it's going to be the patients or the clients or the consumers going in to their practitioner and saying, hey, what do you know? Do you know anything about this? And I think that's when the practitioners are going to say, you know what, I need that education.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and that's why it's an ode to you. It's an ode to a lot of these organizations that are running on basically zero funds, right? And are a swell of, you know, educational materials. And unfortunately, because of the way the government is structured, you know, any education and, or I should say, research studies have to be privately funded or, you know, basically donated. So there's this really big chasm that's going on right now because it's kind of exploded per se of, you know, who's going to be involved, but it still comes down to that grassroots level, what you're talking about. And it always goes, and it's a great honor and it's a great responsibility for those that have studied, understand it. And, you know, I think for you and for myself, I mean, I've only been doing this for 3 years, but believe me, I am connected to some really quality individuals. It's unfortunate to see so many people getting in, selling it at, I mean, for gosh sakes, shoe stores. This is a medicinal plant and it needs to be respected in that way. And so, you know, pain, anxiety, sleep, and autoimmune. You know, so if we talk about beauty, so Elementa and I will be doing the podcast and or the webinar this month for skincare and CBD and does it really work? Now, I can probably tell you 80% of the market, if you go to Sephora, it is cannabis sativa oil. It is hemp seed oil. Okay, so it's not an active cannabidiol that's in the product. So then if you raise the question to, well, how much active cannabidiol, actual isolate or full spectrum, do you actually need for it to really work? You know, dosing 50 milligrams into a product, unfortunately, probably isn't going to be enough if it's in the wrong form and not delivered biomimetically into the skin. So there's this delivery issue, there's quality issue. You've spoken very fervently about quality and the snake oil that's on the market, you know. So if we kind of really step and fast forward into what you specifically work with on an individual basis and what you teach on, I am also very passionate about nutrition. So, you know, let's talk about leaky gut. Let's talk about hormones. Let's talk about menopause. You know, whether it's an autoimmune or menopause, we both agree it's an endocannabinoid deficiency. And so there are all kinds of ways nutritionally and with CBD or cannabis and, microdosing that can help us. Can you speak a little bit intimately about what you know, both scientifically and experientially? Let's just kind of go and start off with hormones, endometriosis, PCOS, menopause, and how virtually the endocannabinoid system can be soothed to help women with that kind of issue.
Sure. So, Cassandra, I think maybe we should just do a little 2-minute of what the endocannabinoid system is in case
Absolutely.
people haven't heard of it. So the endocannabinoid system is a system in our bodies that nobody has ever heard of because, it was discovered, I believe, in the 80s, but it didn't come forward for people to really learn about it for whatever reason. I think probably, I suspect because it had the word canna in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had people say to me, well, the person who discovered it is the same person, Raphael Mechoulam and his team, who also worked on CBD and isolating THC,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is the most famous cannabinoid in the cannabis plant, responsible for, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, intoxicating effect.
Right.
I always like to underscore that CBD is psychoactive. That's why it works. Just like caffeine is psychoactive. So I think people understand what that means once they hear about caffeine. So the endocannabinoid system is a system of balance and homeostasis. It's a receptor, it's a lock and key system. Most of the systems in our body work in a lock and key way. So we have, we have receptors, and then we have the compounds that connect with the receptors, sort of the way we have insulin and glucose, where insulin is the key that allows glucose to enter the cell. So we produce actually our own cannabinoids, which we call endocannabinoids, or inside. So endo meaning inside or internal, and that those are 2AG, which of course is an acronym, and the other one is called anandamide, which the word ananda is Sanskrit for the term bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And we produce our own. So, we know that we produce those compounds when we engage in certain activities that are all really stress-reducing activities. So those endorphins that we thought we were producing during exercise, not so fast. Those are endocannabinoids.
Right.
The feeling of bliss that we have with sex, with orgasm,
Mm-hmm.
that is your endocannabinoid system at work. Meditation, yoga, tapping, for anybody who knows what tapping is, and emotional
EFT.
all of
Mm-hmm.
those things are producing endocannabinoids. And a good food plan, I tend not to use the word diet because I feel like that's a 4-letter word for a lot of people, but an anti-inflammatory food plan, certain foods will actually help to upregulate that endocannabinoid system. So what the theory is, and this theory has been postulated by Ethan Russo about endocannabinoid deficiency and endocannabinoid tone. He believes that everybody has a certain tone, and probably that tone and that deficiency changes throughout the life cycle. So I think if we even look at women and that labile mood that some women have, during their their fertility time period in their lives, is probably intimately related with the endocannabinoid system. When we talk about hormones, we talk about neurotransmitters. That is the endocannabinoid system working with an interplay with our hormones and with our neurotransmitters. And I always like to remind people, your head is attached to your body. These are not two separate things. So what's happening in your gut is happening everywhere in your body. I just gave a talk on cannabis nutrition and the microbiome. This is the if you talk to people who study the microbiome, they'll say, who's hosting who? Because it's the microbiome is directing everything. And we know that the endocannabinoid system is intimately involved with that. So what we see is that for women who have PMS, or now they call it premenstrual euphoric disorder when it's much more severe, for women who have endometriosis, recurrent miscarriage, severe menopausal uh, symptoms. This is the endocannabinoid system that is not, working up to snuff, whether it's because you're producing too much of the endocannabinoids and your receptors are not functioning properly. I don't think we necessarily know exactly what's going on. Uh, and that's why, of course, in many cases for women, doing all these stress reducing techniques can be so powerful. I mean, I know, do you work with energy medicine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really passionate piece for me because I feel, much of what you're touching base with, and the fact that you just did, this speech on the biome, nutrition, and the endocannabinoid system. To your point, the endocannabinoid system is the largest regulating system in the body. And when it comes to hormones and even menopause and fertility, we're lined with CB2 receptors and CB1 receptors. And I've heard, kind of just when you even think about mood, the anandamide, when you say bliss molecule, rises and lifts with different times of our menses, which enhances why we get these, up and down modes with our menses, in which in correlation is why we have so many women. And, I'm a formulator, making products to help, soothe on the stomach or to take to calm down the system with our menses,
Yeah.
same with pain regulation. One really, really unique piece that Dr. Jake Felice brought out was, CBD or cannabis is like the only neurotransmitter that upregulates and goes into a retrograde. So basically it goes up, our neurotransmitters flow up versus down. So if we think about whether it's anxiety or ADHD or just people that are just so focused and we've got our brain just starts just shooting out, whether it's pain or that kind of situation, instead of flowing down, it regulates up to slow that down and stop and interact between that pain regulation. So there's so much fundamental things that we know, but when it comes to women, I think that we're really intuitive and that we're using the medicine and just trying it, and it's individual for everybody, so inflammation, it's aging. Inflammation is pain. Inflammation is leaky gut. And I think you would agree, most of us are walking around, whether it's psoriasis or it's migraines or it's leaky gut, it's your brain's on fire and you have you got a lot of inflammatory. So to your point, these other components built into our lifestyle, nutritionally, our exposome with toxins, we really have to take the responsibility on not grabbing CBD as the next hot thing. Mushrooms aren't the next hot thing. It's really working with individuals such as yourself. And whether it's doing DNA testing or what have you, to really figure out what this kind of like full picture is on how our endocannabinoid system is supported, to your very point. So,
Yes, I couldn't have said it better. It is totally individualized, because I have seen this in my practice. I was for years impacting the endocannabinoid system without knowing I was doing it. And I think
right.
most practitioners, who are looking to affect behavior change through making better choices for food, using aromatherapy and essential oils. I mean, that is like one of the best examples. Cannabis as a plant contains terpenes.
Mhm.
So terpenes are these volatile organic compounds. And people say, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, a terpenoid is the beautiful scent that you get from plants. So a great example is just take your fingernail and scrape that on a lemon, scrape that on a lime, a citrus fruit, or the fragrance that you get from vegetables. Think about a tomato that grows in the summer, a beautiful Jersey tomato, as opposed to a tomato that grows in the dead of winter in a hothouse. Those are two very different tomatoes. And we know that that beautiful scent that you will get from plants, those are often, the terpenoids in the plant. And those terpenoids then are often, derived from all the plants to make essential oils. So cannabis contains essential oils like limonene. And
Mm-hmm.
limonene, we know, is obviously in citrus fruit, and it's very, very uplifting. So for people who want an uplifting experience, they would use limonene. And if you combine that in your life, whether you're using it as, directly on your skin or in a diffuser, it can really make the difference. Whereas linalool, which is in lavender, can be very soothing. So I think these are great ways that you can impact your mood and your endocannabinoid system. And cannabis already can, depending on the cultivar or chemovar strain that you use, contains these these terpenoids. So that's where we see the interaction, and that's where things start getting very, very personalized. I see cannabis as really leading the way for personalized lifestyle medicine and getting people to really take charge of their own health and understand, wait, how does this really impact me? What I find, Cassandra, is that people often throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if they have one experience that doesn't meet their expectation with whatever it is, they say that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, which goes back to the issue of the market right now, right? So they walk into a store or to a co-op, and you have a mass market product that may not be to the height or the quality that you need. Or you sell, you buy, there's a plethora of private label out there and you just don't really know where it's coming from. To your point about the terpenes, also, I'd be interested in your thoughts about minor cannabinoids, because I don't really like to isolate, I really highly respect Russo and Meshulam on their findings, but I don't want to take away the quality of, sometimes an isolate can work really well for someone and their needs, and sometimes a full spectrum or a broad spectrum can work. So for us, we have a CBD and high CBG product, which I find really valuable, and I'm really interested in the CBG aspect being a bone stimulation product for women. I think that's profound. I mean, so when we can take these minor cannabinoids, you can also personalize an artisan product with terpenes. That can be really, really, really powerful. And I think we have a long ways to go with the research. But everybody's endocannabinoid system is different at different times of the day. So I think you're right. There's so many products that I think it's really overwhelming for individuals. Are there specific tips that you share with your clients when they start on a regime?
Well, I always start people hopefully getting them to change other things in their lifestyle. So the typical thing, and I'm sure you see this too, well, and especially because I think I'm in, the go-go city of the world,
Yeah,
I'm
you
right,
are.
so I'm in, right here in Metro New York. So everybody is, in overdrive pretty much 24/7. So there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of insomnia. And those often go hand in hand. So the first thing I do is find out from people very simply with insomnia, what's going on with their sleep. How many people who are sleeping, with the television on, with the lights on, with the cell phone under their head? I think we're going to find out an enormous amount about, and I think actually these data are already out, but maybe they're being not fully revealed, about the impact of that electromagnetic frequency on us.
Huge. Absolutely huge. I fully agree.
So right there is an issue. So if we're still going to live the same unhealthful lifestyle and then just apply whatever, it doesn't have to be CBD or cannabis, it could be anything. That's really not what I'm talking about. I really want people to change everything. It's sort of like, if you're talking about beauty and applying products to our skin, the first thing we have to do is change the inside, because that gut health, we used to think that, the skin, we used to say the skin was the biggest organ. Actually, the microbiome is the biggest organ.
I like
and that.
that.
Yeah,
That's good.
that microbiome, of course, as we know, is impacted by the endocannabinoid system, and then that's going to reflect on our skin and our and our and our skin health. But I what I want to comment on, because I think it's very fascinating. Right now, of course, we're seeing a lot of the big box stores and chains selling. They'll say they're selling, CBD products. Well, what they're selling, of course, are the products you're just mentioning, the skin-based products. And
Yeah.
some of them have, the hemp seed, as you pointed out. And hemp seed I love hemp seed products.
Great.
I think
Good fat.
I think they're awesome. So we have, hemp hearts that you can put on your food, hemp protein powder, hemp fiber, hemp flour, hemp milk, hemp oil, of course. And hemp oil is used as a salad oil. It doesn't work as well as a cooking oil unless it's at a low temperature, because the smoking point is not high enough. And of course, it is fantastic for the skin, and that's because it does have antioxidant benefit. Now, when you're talking about that benefit for the skin from CBD, you really have to go to the aerial part of the plant, right? The flower, and a lot of products are using the leaf and the stem, which aren't quite as high, of course, in CBD, because that is from the female part, the flowering part of the plant. From my vantage point, Cassandra, what I see is that it's a start. It's a start, because, with everything in life, if somebody comes into my practice and they're not eating breakfast, or they're having, the standard American diet, which is also known as STAD, that is actually a real acronym. If that's what they're consuming, if they're not having breakfast and they're having, 4 lattes, and then at 4 o'clock they're hungry. This is very, very typical. And then they have, a Snickers bar and, a salad. And then they come home, they're so stressed out. And what I'll see, a lot of women have an entire bottle of white wine. And they typically will have a pretty decent dinner, but then they can't figure out why they can't get up in the morning and why they're so stressed out. Obviously, I know that if then that person makes this one little change where, they start eating breakfast, one little thing for breakfast, maybe they decide to have one hard cooked egg. I think it's fabulous, because they've made this one little change. So what I see is that the market is really trying to recover from canophobia. That, I wrote an article in the Huffington Post about canophobia many years ago, and it's improved for sure. But it's these little tiny steps that we're taking.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's, you keep kind of waving back to the lifestyle issue, and it's so critically important, and if even thinking about our mind. So, I'm studying to be a hypnotherapist right now. And when you even think about how breath, engaging breath and slowing down, and with hypnotherapy, it's not what people think. It's getting between the critical factor barrier, where your memory and your imagination and your consciousness, and just how even that impacts your endocannabinoid system, getting that to slow down. I mean, autoimmune issues can stem from nutritional deficiencies, genetic SNPs, and a lot of large part of it too is just the toxins that dump out of our brain when we're not thinking correctly, or, in anxiety and things of that nature. So you're exactly right. There's discrepancy between really what's in the product, the quality of the product, and then understanding your personal needs and where you can work individually with somebody like you, or from one of your practitioners from your school. So, I think that the bulk of this conversation really comes back to, there's studies with menopause and the bliss molecule anandamide. We can probably heighten our risk of, infertility and and other issues there and takedown or hot flashes. Children with epilepsy, it has become such a blessing. Unfortunately, it's not very cheap for individuals, so that's something that we have a crossroads with, but it all comes back to personal lifestyle, personal decisions, and accountability in our lives to create an ecosystem that's really supportive for endocannabinoid system. So, I just really want to thank you for kind of reorientating the conversation to, it really does come back to personal decisions and your lifestyle. CBD and cannabis is not, we can't cover symptoms with it. Is that kind of what you're kind of getting to?
Yes. So I have to say, Cassandra, that sometimes if somebody comes into me and they are really at the end of their rope, sometimes, and they've made changes, and they haven't had the impact. They really want a really major impact. In that case, sometimes I will have them start on CBD, but I usually have them, I make a deal with them. If this works, which I know it will, to ameliorating certain symptoms, then you're not going to disappear. You're coming back. And now, they sort of buy into believing me and working with me. Let's then make the other changes. And most of the time I've been very successful with that, because, I want people to be able to, not just believe in what the practitioner says, but also to believe in themselves and the power of their body to be a healing vessel. And I think we've lost sense of that. We've lost sense that we have the power. You have to harness it.
Yep. I love that. And as a practitioner, that is Hippocrates, right? It's the healing power of the body. And it's actually us encouraging, supporting, and helping you understand the power you have to heal the mind, the body, the spirit, and there's all kinds of ways that we can do that. It's easy to get distracted in the sexy supplements world and all of that CBD, but yeah, you're right on. I really, really love that. So in your kind of, to close things up, I really, two things. I would love to know kind of what's ahead for you. I know that you have the CBD Miracle, and you're going to be doing some tour, with Elementa and Elisa and her new book this summer. You've got the education portal, and kind of where you're going this summer and what's up next for you in the next 3 months. And where do you see the industry as far as CBD and cannabis going, connecting with all the ties and events that you speak at?
Well, I think that what we're going to be seeing, of course, I think we're going to be seeing medical marijuana and also adult personal use, which a lot of people call recreational, which I don't like because that demeans the plant.
You bet.
I think we're going to see this sweeping the nation and also around the world. We're definitely going to be seeing that. But I do think that the plant that is really going to take off is hemp. Now, we know that hemp is cannabis, so just for clarification, cannabis is one plant, and we have the marijuana plant, which is above 0.3% THC, and for the most part, it's way above 0.3% THC, and then hemp is below 0.3% THC. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot about hemp now with the U.S., with the passing of the U.S. Farm Bill, which happened at the late end of 2018.
Right.
We're going to be seeing a lot more hemp products, not only for wellness and beauty, but also for building fiber, which of course is a different type of plant, but it's still the hemp plant, a different variety. But we're going to be seeing a lot more. So it's sort of funny because I don't think people realize that historically we're going full circle, because when this country was founded, it was the Jamestown colonists were required to grow hemp.
Right.
And of course, Jefferson and Washington grew hemp, smoked hemp, enjoyed hemp, and was, Betsy Ross's flag was made of hemp. The Declaration of Independence is on hemp. Ford made a car of hemp. So, I mean, we have a lot of things that have happened already historically. And, when people say, history repeats itself. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're moving in that direction for sure. So we're going to be seeing that. I think we're going, as you pointed out, I think we're going to be seeing a lot about the other cannabinoids in the
Mm-hmm.
plant. It's not going to just be THC and CBD. I actually think what we're going to be hearing about are the acid formats of the
You bet.
cannabinoids, meaning the formats that are not decarboxylated or heated. We're going to be hearing about that. The other cannabinoids, the other components of the plant. And unfortunately, it takes a long time for research to get to practice. And, people don't like that. And I can tell you, as a parent of a child with a disability, it's often the parents, particularly the mothers, who are the ones who are really making these changes happen.
Right.
Because if you have a child who is, whether your child, like my child, was having seizures that were almost an hour long, or you have a child who's having 200 seizures a day, or you have a child who can't make eye contact, or is literally spinning, and I'm not using this in a metaphoric way, literally spinning.
Literally. Yep.
You're not waiting.
Yep.
You are not waiting. Unless the modality or the approach is super dangerous, you are not waiting. And I really think that healthcare professionals, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a dietitian, a hypnotherapist, whoever it is, a chiropractor, people are going to call me and say, left me out. Anybody have to really be listening to their clients when they come in and not just dismissing them. I found in my journey with Isabella that a lot of things people were dismissive about. They were especially dismissive about nutrition. So even when Isabella's seizures were ameliorated using nutrition, because I had her on a modified, she was on a ketogenic food plan,
Right.
and then modified Atkins.
Yep.
Her seizures went away.
Yeah. The keto and the CBD and cannabis is really, really powerful together. It does need to be
absolutely
really, really closely watched over, but it's super powerful.
absolutely.
So in itself, and right on with the acid components, CBDA, THCA, all of those. I think those are really powerful, can be very powerful as well. So yeah, I think it's going to continue to blow up. One interesting piece, maybe even flipping it real quick, I've got clients that come in, and we're in Minnesota. It's not legal, but I'm going to be completely honest. My clients are making gummies for their moms. They're in pain and they have different autoimmune issues. And so they research it, they Amazon it, they get the materials, they figure out how to get the material, and they make it. And even though there's a lot of medical professionals that don't want to look at it, they will have to look at it. And there's also a lot of medical professionals that I see saying, you know what? You're doing that. That's good. Thank you for letting me know. Keep on doing it. So I'm happy to see that there are a lot of them waking up. And when they really understand, I think that the biggest thing that we can help them understand is the endocannabinoid system. It's not about CBD. It's not about THC. It's really about, do you understand that you are actually treating the endocannabinoid system? Do you know how to get that to work collectively together? Do you know how to heal and close up the gut so that it can all work better together? So, I love your approach, and I think it's the right one, and I think it's the appropriate one. Because when we get schizo and get into all these different fragments of isolate, ethanol derived, CO2 derived, it distracts us from how our body works and how we heal and how we can help each other find the best components that will work individually for the patient. So, I really love your approach. So for you, I always end the podcast with just something personal for you, Laura, that doesn't have to be anything nutrition, wellness, or cannabis derived, but what have you personally awakened to recently in your life that you would want to share, with the listeners that you think would, helpful, or something that is just on your heart?
I think it's really crucial for all of us to do self-reflection, and not once a year or when you go to a workshop, but maybe even start out your morning. I mean, people talk about this a lot, but it's such a simple thing to do. And a lot of people call it a gratitude journal. Just any amount of self-reflection, because I think it's very easy for all of us to see, the grass is greener. I mean, the grass will always be greener, but what is it that we're looking at, and what is it that we value? And I think what's happened for many of us, I mean, even if I look at my own family, I come from a family, like most of us in the US, a family of immigrants. And my my immigrant family, I mean, I have a lot of cousins in Italy, and they have come to my house. They think my house is like an enormous palace, which is funny to me because, of course, in the scheme of where I live, it is not.
Right.
So, it's a comparative and relative thing. So I think just having that, having that self-reflection to know that we're all blessed, no matter what situation we're in, we're all blessed, and to find that one thing, that one feeling that we know is good and pushing us to the next thing. And sometimes, you know what, Cassandra, that one feeling could be the one thing we've been talking about is anxiety, because you know what, you have to have a little bit of anxiety to drive you to do the next thing. Without that,
yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think the balance conversation is a really hard one because there is no such thing as balance.
yeah.
And we're always kind of,
Okay.
there's in functional medicine, there's the stress curve. Have you ever seen it? So, you and I would understand it or appreciate it, where on the very, very far end of one end is you're can't get out of bed, you're depressed, low mood, no energy. And then you have, I'm depressed, I have migraines, I'm kind of low energy, probably where the adrenal fatigue starts. And then right here is kind of that sweet spot. And it kind of shares that, that you're kind of in this modest mode between a stress state and a low state. And so that's kind of like the sweet spot. We're rarely ever there, right? And then we get to anxiety and really, really hyper stimulated, and then hyper stimulated, and then just anxiety and all these mental disorders. So, I just think it's a really beautiful curve to kind of really what you're saying, self-reflect and meditate. Where are you on that stress curve? And, there's an appropriate place to be on the stress curve, and who is your support system to reach out to help you kind of stay in that, let's call it the sweet spot, so I really like that. Thank you. Well, Laura, where can our Awaken Beauty podcast listeners find you? Tell us, the education center, your website. Tell us all about it.
Sure. Well, you can find me at laura@lauralagano.com. And lauralagano.com is where you could also find my book. And there is also, or there will be, a link for my education course, but you can also go to a separate website, Holistic Canna. So the word holistic and then the word canna. So there's two C's in the middle.com for my full education program on integrating cannabis with holistic modalities. And I would urge people to reach out to me, for anything, appointments, looking at the book, if you have questions about, cannabis education, or just questions in general about how to even enter the field. I always want to encourage people to enter the field.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I really believe in women, rising women, and you are one powerful woman out there. So stay strong, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll maybe connect with you in the future and catch up with you on a podcast episode. And thank you all for listening to the Awaken Beauty podcast. So make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And please, I ask you, don't just give a 5-star, don't just give a like. Please leave your aha moment that you had with our time with Laura Lagano today, so that you can bless other women on what you awaken to as well. So all for now, signing off.